Good afternoon. Great to see each of you that are here. I appreciate you making this a priority in your afternoon. My name is Katie Dempsey. I'll be chairing the committee. I also serve as the chairman of Human Resources for our House budget, and I'm privileged to serve on a number of committees. This is what we're going to focus on right now. I think many of you have met with me or contacted or reached out to us with ideas. And as we go forward, I want to make it very clear that this is a conversation. It's a big conversation. We're going to start it. We're going to see how far it goes in our allotted meetings and then see if we need to continue with even more. But my great hope is that we will leave with a document that is fairly open-ended and allows some opportunities for appropriate legislation or policy to develop from that as we wrap up this. So, to the conversation piece too, I want you to know that any ideas that each of you have or that you might know others who have to contribute, I want them to be a part of it. So ask them to get in touch with me, to get in touch with Michael, to let us know, let us have your contact information and your ideas on something that you feel might be very important to the work we are going to attempt to do here. And to my fellow members on the committee, I want to encourage you to ask questions and to be part of this. There will be appropriate time for presentations, but then also I want you to feel like if you need more information, feel this is the perfect opportunity to have it. We are taping this. It will be available not only today but online later in the archives. I know that many in this community have trouble reaching our Capitol, but I want to make sure that everyone can hear what we say and then be a part of the work that we're going to do. So what I'd like to do is start off first of all and take a moment for our committee to introduce themselves. To the committee, I would say a little bit of housekeeping, that there is a list in your packet here of information, of contact information that we had available to us. If you have more numbers or resources that you'd like to share for Samantha and Michael and I to have to be able to follow up and get in touch with you on anything, that would be great. You can just get that to us. But if we could start first of all with Representative Werkheiser and just tell us just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
I'm Representative Bill Werkheiser from South Georgia, and I'm in the printing business. My involvement with I've been involved with Pineland CSB for about 15 years in several different capacities. They utilize some work. I provide some work space for them to do daily activities, and just been involved with trying to help where I can for about 13 years.
And good afternoon. I'm Bubba Epps, House District 144, which is mainly in the middle part of our state, in the Macon and surrounding area. Likewise, I serve on the Chairman's Appropriation Subcommittee on Human Resources. So I've had an opportunity to work with her and under her guidance and leadership, and appreciate her work in getting this to the point we have it today. And I appreciate your efforts to attend and to enlighten us as to, I'm sure, many issues that we need to have a basic knowledge of.
Good afternoon. I'm Valencia Stovall of House District 74 in Clayton County, and I'm really excited about being able to serve with Chairwoman Dempsey as well as my other colleagues in the House. And I have a personal story. It's not a long story, but a short story. My son actually has a developmental disability. He's 23 years old, and so when you talk about post-secondary employment, I'm feeling it right now as far as him graduating from high school and now thrown into the workforce and still needing a little bit more additional skills and support from him being able to be an active citizen and not having to depend on mom for everything. So I'm really excited to see where this study committee goes, and I'm pretty sure it's going to go very well and be very successful for our citizens in Georgia who are the most at need. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are joined by Michael Parkerson, our policy analyst, who will be working with us on this subcommittee, and then legislative counsel also here to keep us straight, for sure. But thank you so much. So let's get started. Let's begin. Our first speaker, I understand that we had on tap, is not well and had to back out, but we have a great representative here. Byron Smith from DBHDD will be talking to us first of all. And Byron serves as the coordinator for supported employment services at the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. Byron, I'd love for you to tell us just a little bit more about yourself too before you begin. Yep, have we got him on? What do I have to do? Let's try that.
Okay, good afternoon. Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, State Representatives. My name is Byron Shorten. I am the coordinator for supported employment service with the Division of DD, and I will be filling in for Frank Kirkland, the Assistant Director, who is ill today. We find it a great pleasure to stand before you to have a discussion and to give you insight on what we're doing at the department, and we want to act as a resource in any way possible for this topic. We know these two topics are very important topics, and we want to make sure we are available to give you as much resources as you need as we move forward. Okay? Let's go to the second one here. So as you forward, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services allow for the reimbursement of the following services under the NOW and the COMP waiver. The NOW is a new option waiver, and the COMP is a comprehensive waiver. These services generally take place within the hours of 9 to 5 on the daily, and therefore they're considered to be day services. Individuals desiring to have these services go through a process in our state offices where they're enrolled, and therefore they're elected these services, and then they're choosing a provider to do so. Supported employment services are services designed for individuals to be gainfully employed in the community at or above minimum wage. That is important. Community access services are services designed to assist individuals with becoming integrated and connected to the community, while pre-vocation services are services that are for job training, are time limited, and they lead to employment services at some point. Excuse me. So we have provided you a ratio for our current services and their service delivery model. Community access is a community, and it is a facility-based service, and it is delivered at a ratio of 1 up to 10 individuals. Community access individual is a 1-to-1 service, and it is a community-only service, while pre-vocation is both a facility-based service as well as a community service, and is delivered up to 1 staff person up to 10 individuals. While supported employment is only a community-based service and is delivered on a 1-to-1 basis for individual and a group ratio of 1 to 10 in the community. This slide kind of demonstrates some national landscapes that we talked about. The picture before you demonstrates nationally what we're going through with these 3 major changes over the last couple of years. One being CMS announced policy changes that will require all state agencies providing waiver services to submit action plans before next renewal process on how they plan to be more inclusive in employment as well as day services. Again, we have for those states that do not demonstrate how they plan to be more proactive, the Department of Justice has stepped in and intervened and entered into settlement agreements. Whereas WIOA is one of the more milestones here lately. They've initiated certain policies and practices that will require both DD, VR, and the DOE to act as one agency moving forward. Just here shortly, we were able to enter into an executed contract with the the Georgia Department of Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, and that agency focuses on employment. It focuses on making sure that there are dedicated counselors moving forwards, there are dedicated benefit navigators, and there is a priority for individuals coming out of high school. We've also implemented some pilots around the state. We want to make sure we have adequate funding. We're looking at how a fee-for-service model will begin to look in the near future as most states move to a fee-for-service and not a unit rate. We also are looking at changing our definitions to become more compliant with CMS regulations and looking at a rate study coming up in the next couple of months to make sure that we are adequately compensating for those services. This slide represents our commitment to post-secondary. As you see, for FY13 through FY16, we've assisted Kennesaw State with building capacity to serve more individuals across the state. We've also worked with the Center for Leadership and Disability to do RSPs to scout other universities that may be interested in providing post-secondary programs. And we've, from that process, we've identified 2 new university partners, and we've provided seed funding for those universities to begin this fall and again in the spring in 2016. Okay, I think that's all the questions. That's all I have for you as I fill in for Frank. Are there any questions that I could may entertain for you?
Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Great.
Okay, give me your position again. I'm sorry, I didn't write it down.
Coordinator for Supported Employment Services.
Okay. The question I have on one of the slides, I think it's the one that has supported employment initiatives. What is meant by the braided funding, which is improves collaboration with the vocational rehab?
Okay. As you know, across the nations, we are being forced to look at how we allocate funding. So we want to begin here in Georgia. Again, it's looking at how 2 state agencies that are designed to work together and for target populations. So our MOU basically says that, hey, we will now allow VR to do the upfront servicing for those that are time limited, and then we will take up the long-term servicing with a waiver of state-funded services. So it's going to be one service provided by 2 different agencies, as it is around all states. We're not unique. It's the way that people are moving, states are moving, in order to make sure we're getting good stewards of the dollars.
Okay, so like for Mayor, Chairman?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Like when a student graduates from high school, I know that the vocational rehab kind of picks them up.
For me?
What are we doing? We're hot. Let's see if that's better.
Okay. So I know the vocational rehab usually steps in once they graduate from high school. And then after, I know before, after maybe a 6-month period, the students were, to me, in my opinion, would kind of drop. That might not be the right word to use, but so is that where you were saying that braided service or something will pick up to kind of help continue on with the process? Because even like if a student receives employment, and then say after the 6-month period they end up not working out for that with that particular employment agency or company, then they're kind of stuck out there without any additional help or support to kind of further them along. So is that kind of similar to what you were saying, or?
That is exactly. What you will find, there is a renewed spirit between VR and DD working together, and when those individuals are considered to be stable, providers are still required to continue with the life of the job, but they aren't being compensated. Mm-hmm. So with this new agreement, we plan to compensate them so to make sure the individual gets the supports he needs for the longevity period and in fact for the life of the job. So yeah, that's part of what we're doing. We're picking up those gaps that we have and mending those fences that are broken.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
And this maybe what I'm just heading to is I know the last session when we looked at this, it was didn't seem to be an achievable level in employment opportunities in this area, are your plans to make sure that these that are trained and have gone through the behavioral therapy and so forth and are eligible for an employment opportunity, the numbers will increase beyond where they have been in the last couple of years that we've noticed? Probably not the achievement that we had hoped for.
I think, like I said before, I think this is a renewed spirit, but I do want to clarify there are two agreements. There's one with DD, which is Division of Developmental Disabilities, and there's one with Behavioral Health. But the optimal outcome is to increase employment for all individuals across the state. To answer your question, yes. As I mentioned before, nationally there is a renewed spirit around employment and day services. So it's just not here in Georgia. We're really trying to get ahead of the curve to make sure we're doing what needs to be done to get the results that we're asking for.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, let's go back and focus again on those first couple of slides, not the one that explains what the services are, but when we start with the current employment and day services. So this is very recent numbers, I would say.
Yes. That is the end of FY15.
FY15. Okay, so when you say up to 1 in 10, can you explain those numbers again for me? I'm not sure I grasped that one and the next slide, the numbers that are on there. If you could just kind of go back over that for me.
The ratio or the numbers enrolled?
Okay.
I'm sorry. The numbers at the right of that are the numbers currently enrolled as of end of FY15.
Okay.
And the ratio describes the policy. Providers can have one direct support professional to every 10 individuals.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that I had that cleared. So the this slide here that says the number enrolled, do we have any relative numbers to people that are not enrolled right now but needing services? Is there long waiting lists? What?
We do have those numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head.
Okay.
But if you will allow the courtesy, I'll get that information back to you.
Absolutely. I think that'd be important
Okay.
to what we're trying to do a little bit, when you can provide them
Okay.
for us. I
Well,
think that's our challenge right now as we go through this, is to look at, we know you are providing great services to those who have found access and had success, actually, in some cases, in navigating a system that can sometimes be a little bit challenging
Right.
at times. What we want to find out, too, is those that are possibly that you're aware of that still are in need.
And this is why it's so important for our MOU with VR as we begin to allow for funding and more federal funding to serve more people. Because again, before now we kind of operated in silos and we didn't necessarily work together. But with this renewed spirit and our vision, we hope to eliminate the wait list for supported employment services at least.
Is there anything else that you feel like you need to share with us about the operation of those services at all? Just just not necessarily in a factual manner, but in a conversational way.
As I mentioned, we are rewriting the definition to ensure that individuals are getting the best service possible, and we're looking at the funding to make sure providers are being compensated adequately. Again, this is not just in Georgia. As I mentioned, the Department of Justice, they have a keen eye, and they're looking at those states that are not performing well and have no desire to do well. So it behooves us to get ahead of the curve so that we may not find ourselves in those conversations with the Department of Justice. And so I think we're doing a couple things. The MOU with VR, I think the service definition we're changing to make sure that individuals are getting the best support possible, and also compensating our providers at an adequate level to keep good staff.
Very good. Anything else? Any other? Okay. Well, thank you so very much
Thank you
for
all.
starting us off well.
Thank you.
So next, I think we have one of our strongest advocates for this measure, who spent a lot of time talking to me and others I know, Don Alford. Don is the Public Policy Director at the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities. And, the personal experience I've seen from her, she works tirelessly on the issue, and look forward to hearing what you're going to share with us. When you start, I want you to tell us a little bit more about yourself as well, too, because there's much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And can I take a moment just to get a little situated here, if I might?
Absolutely. You take your time.
And as
That would be great. That would be great. Now, are y'all going to present from there? Because I want you to know, I'm concerned about the microphones picking up. I don't know if there's a way we could move y'all as far as the table, if that would still help you so that microphone can pick you up. I want you to be able to be heard all throughout the state. Move anything. Take a moment. Move whatever you need for everyone to have access and for y'all to be well heard. And while they're doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about Darcy, too. She has been another strong advocate for this committee to get us to expand in our knowledge and hopefully in our results as well. She represents Employment First Georgia, and I think y'all co-presenting will be a very good measure. Looks like there's been a lot of work. There's an artist in our midst somewhere.
Not one of us. We had to bring someone else's talents.
Thank you. Take a deep breath and let's get going on it.
Thank you. As Representative Dempsey introduced me, I'm Darcy Robb with Employment First Georgia. Is my microphone on? Okay, how about that?
That's
There we go.
very good.
Okay.
Very good.
So I'm Darcy Robb with Employment First Georgia. I am a passionate disability and employment advocate and a mother of a young child. And the folks that I represent, Employment First Georgia, is a diverse coalition of members who believe that all people have abilities that can be put to use in the workforce.
And I'm Dawn Alford, the Public Policy Director with the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities. Many of you know me around the Capitol. As Madam Chair Dempsey said, I am an advocate. This is both professional for me, but it is also very personal. And I am grateful for this opportunity to talk to you all today. The Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities works to promote positive social and policy change in Georgia for people with disabilities and their families. We wanted to present to you together today because the two of us are leading the advocacy efforts around a major employment initiative and a major educational initiative for people with disabilities here in Georgia.
And we thought the best way to show you the changes we want to see would literally be to show you the changes. So we worked with the artist and advocate Brittany Curry, who created these drawings. In the first panel over here on the left, this shows the state of our current disability service system and the kind of world that it creates for people with disabilities and their families.
So the first drawing, this was inspired by a mother we met who said that navigating Georgia's disability service system felt like hacking through the jungle all by herself with a machete. These isolated towers in the jungle, this is the state of our current disability service system. You've got 4 separate agencies: the Department of Education, the Department of Community Health, the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, and the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. They all serve people with disabilities and their families.
But every agency's got their own separate agenda. Every agency's got separate goals, they've got separate data systems, they've got separate funding streams, and they've got a separate way of doing things. And something that we think should be absolutely critical is supporting people with disabilities to get real jobs. But the reality is that's not a high priority at most of our state agencies. The reality is they tend to get so focused on their own separate towers that they don't work together nearly as much as we think they should.
And if you take a look over here at how that translates into real life, you see that despite our ivory tower issues, we do have some good pieces to build on. And one piece we've got that has been a game changer for this generation of young people is IDEA. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Because of IDEA, the standard is that all children with disabilities get to go to school. Children who were once thought incapable of learning are defying all expectations.
But the problem is once you get out of high school, Representative Stovall knows this very well, your IDEA support is over. People call this falling off the IDEA cliff, which you can see we've literally got a cliff over there. And that happens because we don't have a standard expectation or a standard support system for people with disabilities once they're out of high school. People have to navigate these separate state agency systems. As we all know, many of these state agencies have waiting lists for their services. And so unfortunately what happens is a lot of people leave high school, they fall off the cliff, and they wind up with nothing.
And those that fall off the cliff, these are what we call the couch kids. A lot of people with a lot of promise finish high school, only to wind up on their parents' couch. And not only is this frustrating and lonely and frankly a waste of abilities, but it's extremely hard for the whole family. Our cartoon character here is a mother saying something that I've heard many parents say. I need my job, but I can't just leave my child sitting on the couch all day long. This is unfortunately a very real choice that many Georgia families are facing. You have families that go into extreme economic hardship because a parent feels that they have no choice but to leave their job. You have families where the parents scramble as hard as they can to find something worthwhile for their child to do during the day.
And we also have quite a few Georgians with disabilities who wind up in nursing home facilities. And I'm not talking about older folks because unfortunately we have young adults and even teenagers here in Georgia with disabilities who live in nursing home facilities. That's very depressing for them and it's very expensive for the state.
We even have some Georgians with disabilities who fall off the IDEA cliff and end up in jail. Sometimes that's directly related to not getting the treatment they need. Sometimes it's because they've been set up to be a fall guy. Sometimes it's because they've made a poor choice. This is a horrible outcome for these folks and their families, and it's a huge drain on our public dollars. And we are vulnerable to this happening. People on couches, in nursing facilities, and in jail, because once they are out of high school, we really don't do much to help people who could succeed with just a little support.
Now we do have some folks who fall off this IDEA cliff who land on a sort of ledge. You have some folks with intellectual or developmental disabilities who go to day programs or sheltered workshops. So a day program is similar to adult daycare for folks with disabilities. And sheltered workshops are facilities where people with disabilities do repetitive work for sub-minimum wage. It's not the worst of all possible worlds, but frankly we know a lot more now than we did when these systems were designed, and we can do better. So programs like these are not the solution, because if you talk to these young people coming out of school, they want a career. They don't want to go to daycare for the rest of their lives. And we've talked to a lot of folks in this type of programs right now who are bored, and they're not earning a living, and they're curious to get out and be part of the broader world. But right now in our state system, we pay more to put someone in a day program or a sheltered workshop than we do to help them find and maintain a real job. Providers earn $7,000 more a year for having a person in adult daycare than they do for supporting someone to have a job. And that doesn't make sense because the state saves money when someone leaves a non-work program and starts working.
So we've got to get all these folks who fall off the cliff or land on the ledge, but so we've got all these folks who fall off the cliff or land on the ledge, but then there are a few lucky souls who do make it to the other side of the IDEA cliff. They're able to build a good life after high school. They wind up seeking advanced education or building a career like any other young person.
So it would be easy to assume that the ones who get to the other side of our cliff over there are going to be your best or your brightest young people with disabilities, and a term that we sometimes hear is high functioning. But I have to tell you, our experience has borne out that that's not really the case. People get to the other side because they're lucky. That's the determining factor. The folks who get to the other side have really good super advocates in their lives who get them across this pit. In our illustration, you can see we've got one Superman character, and she's saying, "We will support you however we can. Let's figure out what comes next. Do you need more education, an internship, a job?" And then our young man they're supporting says, "This is awesome. I wish all kids with disabilities got to do this stuff." And the other super advocate is saying, "I wish they did too. But there are not enough of us to fill the gap, and too many fall off."
Now, exactly what you need does depend on the person, but it can be done for virtually every person with every kind of disability. During these committee meetings, you're going to meet some of these folks who show that it is possible for virtually everyone to have meaningful employment. And having that meaningful employment is so good for people, just like any of us. It makes a person happier and healthier. I know I can personally attest to this. It gives them a purpose and a sense of pride in a paycheck. It also gives a better use of taxpayer dollars than programs like adult daycare and sheltered workshops and other non-work programs out there for people with disabilities. In the study that Darcy alluded to earlier, it was found that the state of Georgia saves an average of $260 per person per month when a person with intellectual or developmental disabilities gets vocational rehabilitation services to help them work. Now that's because when people work, they become taxpayers, and they don't need as many non-work services from the state.
One of the speakers who's going to come after us today is Jennifer Briggs. And her agency supports people all over the northern half of Georgia with all kinds of disabilities to work. So she can really tell you how the rubber meets the road and how you help a person find and build a meaningful career, and also the consequences, what that means for that person and what it means for their family. So we do want to point out that's another really big bright spot that we have in Georgia. We have a handful of providers who are really good at helping folks with disabilities find and maintain their employment.
Now, something else we're doing well in Georgia is inclusive post-secondary education. Inclusive post-secondary education opens up the world of higher education to students with intellectual and developmental disabilities who might not otherwise have this opportunity. Now, thanks to the support from you all in the General Assembly, we've been able to grow the number of inclusive post-secondary education programs in Georgia from 1 to 4. And that is a huge success, because we've got the stories and the data to show that students who receive inclusive post-secondary education have much better employment outcomes than their peers who don't get that inclusive post-secondary education. And IPSE, as we call it, is definitely another one of our big bright spots.
So if we were going to sum up this whole argument we've just made, we would say that in the Georgia we've got now, we get good outcomes, really good outcomes for a lucky minority of people. And our challenge now is to take the good things system-wide.
So now we want to focus a little bit on the change we want. Now, we want to make Georgia an employment-first state. Employment first means we affirm that working and building a career is the best way for people with disabilities to spend their days. And we make it the first choice explored for all working age Georgians with disabilities. Now that includes all people with disabilities, those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, people with physical disabilities, people with mental health disabilities, and people with the most significant disabilities.
So you can see kind of our visualization of what that will look like over in the third drawing over there. Because in an Employment First Georgia, it is going to become the norm for people with disabilities to go to work and build their careers. And we envision state agencies sharing this goal, sharing data and braiding funds and working together to make employment a top priority for all working age people with disabilities. And right now, unfortunately, it is not. Right now, you've got people who are told they can go to day programs or nursing home facilities before anyone has even considered whether they would like a career. I'm going to share with you briefly a real-life story. We got a call a few months ago at Employment First Georgia, a young woman and her mother who were very upset. The young woman had finished high school. She was very clear she wanted to go to work, period. And she just needed some support to help do that. In her conversations with the state agency staff, the staff member actually told her that they didn't know if it would be possible for her to go to work and suggested instead that she go to a program for people with disabilities. And to us, that's just wrong. And it's not anybody's evil intent, but unfortunately that happens all over in our system right now. And that's why we think we need a big effort to get everyone on the same page, really turn things around so everybody gets a chance at employment. So we want to change that, and in 10 years, we want Georgia to look like the final picture over there.
So in an Employment First Georgia, there is no more IDEA cliff. Students with disabilities do what everyone else does. They transition from school into their career. And might I also add that we, as a society, have that high expectation of those students with disabilities just like we do of any student. Students with disabilities do what everyone else does. They transition from school into their career. While students with disabilities are in school, we encourage them all to dream about their careers. They get help planning their careers, and once they're out of high school, we see to it that there are available funds and resources to go to supporting them to build these careers.
And we prioritize what available funds and resources we do have so that we emphasize those careers. And part of building an Employment First Georgia is going to involve expanding inclusive post-secondary education, and that's the higher education piece for our students with intellectual disabilities. And we've had, of course, the recent addition of more programs, which we're very, very grateful to y'all for your support. And our programs are still getting far more applications than they have available spaces. And the neat thing about inclusive post-secondary, one of the many neat things, is that it is strongly linked to better employment outcomes. So we just got our first data from our inclusive post-secondary grads here in Georgia, and I'm very proud to tell you that 57% of our inclusive post-secondary grads from Georgia are working right now, and another 21% are continuing their education. And that is especially wonderful when you compare it with other employment numbers for people with disabilities. So if you look at our Georgians who are on the NOW or the comp waiver, only 14% of them are working or training to go to work. And it does not have to be that way. It does not have to be that way. If you look at Washington State, I only look at them because they were the first state in the country to have an employment first policy. But if you look at their folks with intellectual disabilities who are receiving state services, the folks who would be on their version of the NOW or the comp waiver, 87% of those people are working or training to enter the workforce right now. 87%. And we've got 14. But we can do this. We're the business state. We can be the employment first state. That is the power of a good employment first system right there.
As you can see, the path to employment is going to depend on the person. In this example, a person with a physical disability might need a personal assistant, like me, to help them get up and get ready for class in a traditional college program every morning. And later, they might need that personal assistant to help them get up and get ready for their job every day. But the outcome is that the person does get a college education. They have a job. They have a career. They have a real life. They are a taxpayer. And they're not sitting at home on the couch. And they're not sitting in a nursing facility all day long. In an Employment First Georgia, having a career will be the new normal. And right now, I can tell you all, I am one of the very few with a significant physical disability in Georgia who has been able to take the working path. But even now, for me, with a college education from a great school, phenomenal employment, and wonderful supports, even now for me, I still face tremendous barriers on a daily basis just to be able to maintain employment, which is where I want to be. But in a Georgia that we want a culture that welcomes employment first, such that these barriers are significantly broken down and reduced so that the dawns of the world and the other people with disabilities like me have the opportunity to work and the resources that they need to be able to do that. Because like me, they just want to be able to give back to their community and be a part of Georgia just like we all do.
So you can see in our drawing there that the path is going to depend on the person. And the top path is actually based on Dawn herself. The middle path, you can see for one person, it might be you start with inclusive post-secondary education, which involves internships, and from those internships, you get a job. For another person, you might need to start with some behavioral support. And once you've got that piece in place, you can do job sampling, try out a bunch of different careers, and then you can go on to start your own business, which self-employment and entrepreneurship historically has been an underutilized way of finding jobs for folks with disabilities. We're now finding that it's very promising. You know, the paths all look the same, but the paths all look different. It's the end goal that's the same. You want for each person to build a career that is going to challenge and satisfy them.
Now, we also believe that in Employment First Georgia, to the best of our ability, we've got to give everyone a chance at work. A lot of people who are already out of school and a lot of older folks have actually talked to us about how much they want to work. So in Employment First Georgia, we go to the people who are already in the system and not working, and we look at their talents and skills, and we take a fresh look to see how they can contribute, and we try to transition their services to recenter them around employment, especially when this is their goal.
You can see in our drawing there set in the blue, we've got an example of a person who's in a sheltered workshop who's interested in working. So the first step for that person is to go to community college and just get a little exposure to the world and see what's out there. Unfortunately, a lot of older folks with disabilities have never really had that opportunity. So this particular person discovers that their passion and their gift is for painting. And then they start selling their artwork, and they discover another gift, which is for teaching. So they're selling their work, they're teaching art classes. And all of a sudden, we've got a person who doesn't want and doesn't need to be in a daycare all day long.
And this path is based on a true story of a man who spent 2 years in a sheltered workshop learning how to use a shredder. No one thought he could work, but one day he was taken to a modern art museum, and he got so excited just being there that some employment folks thought, maybe let's put a paintbrush in his hand. And that gentleman now creates and sells his own artwork.
It almost sounds like a disability urban legend, but it really is true. I want to close by sharing one other story with you, and that's one of my favorite employment stories. And it's about a young man named Marvin. So Marvin had multiple significant disabilities, very limited verbal skills, but he was an amazing gardener, and he'd always tended his own little plot of land. So he got a microgrant, and he expanded his garden, and he started his business called Marvin's Mushrooms. And he started selling his produce to restaurants and farmers markets. That's his career. So that's also what Employment First is all about. It's about changing the way we look at people with disabilities and changing the way we treat people with disabilities. So rather than seeing them as people who need to be taken care of, we're looking for their talents and their interests, and then we help them put those talents and interests to work.
And we want you to know that if it meets the needs of this committee, we have various sites around the state that have volunteered to host your future meetings. For example, Shaw Industries in Dalton is an excellent employer of people with disabilities, and so is the city of Tifton in southwest Georgia. They have both volunteered to hold meetings, as have our inclusive post-secondary education programs at Kennesaw State University and East Georgia State University in Statesboro. They have volunteered to host meetings as well. We really just want to take this opportunity to genuinely thank each and every one of you for your interest in our community and in these issues. We are so excited to work with you on Employment First and inclusive post-secondary education. Please know that we'll do anything we can to support the work of this committee and to support all of your efforts. At this point, we would be more than happy to take any kind of questions you all might have.
Well, thank you. Your excitement shows. Those are wonderful visuals, too. And I know that the camera back here, probably, I hope they're getting it so that everybody else that couldn't be here can also see it. Thank you. You've brought a lot to our awareness. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Yes, Representative Werkheiser.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Madam Chair. And as she said, great presentation. It's hard for me to get past the first drawing and talk about what we can do until we fix the process, because I'm a process guy. So in the past, in the most, I guess, recent legislation, it seems like and I know this is not employment first, but even if we adhere to or take up employment first, if we haven't fixed the process, we're not going to maximize what we can do. So do we have extra layers, and such as and this is not me, I'm just going by it. I have read volumes of information the last 2 weeks and interviewed several people. And one of the questions is the support coordinator level. Do we need to go back and redo some of what we've done recently as far as fixing the jungle part?
No. You're right. I appreciate the insightfulness of that question. It's not going to be enough to get a declaration that we're an employment first state. I mean, I see the state agencies, with no disrespect to anyone, they're kind of like ocean liners, and they're all, there are some ropes that go between the boats, but we've got to sync them all up. I think support coordinators are certainly part of it. I'm not convinced that support coordinators are really educated about employment. I think there is a wide range of knowledge among support coordinators, and also just even a range of buy-in. With employment first, I really think what we need to do is not just declare that we are an employment first state, which I believe we do need to do that. We need to have that philosophy, and frankly, we need the legislative muscle to declare that. But we need to have a sort of coordinating body. And what we've been thinking about is having a stakeholder committee from folks in various roles in the system all over Georgia that will effectively drive the work of employment first. Because you're right, it is going to be a whole process. It's not going to be a quick process, but it's going to be a 5 to 10 year process where we envision that this committee would meet, would examine the issues, and would sort of create a blueprint to tie the state agencies together and to really drive the work of employment first. The education of support care coordinators, I think, is going to be one piece of that. Coordinating the state agency efforts is going to be another piece. Just as one example, in Tennessee, which is a state that has been lauded for their recent strides toward employment first, they actually have an MOU that's between 5 state agencies. It's a great thing to have MOUs, and I am very excited about our new DD and VR MOU, but I think it's an even better idea if we could get all of the agencies on the same page. So it's going to be a process, and we very much want to be a part of that.
Thank you.
Representative Stovall.
What has been your you all's conversation, I guess, with the K through 12, more specifically dealing with the high school? Because I know you talked about internship, and I know several schools in my district have ran into roadblocks when it came down to the students that are in the transition program. We're trying to find them some type of internship or even help them with employment. And I think that when you talk about post-secondary, you have to kind of set the baseline for the students to be excited about knowing that there is some hope for them after they leave high school. And so I was just curious at some of the talks that you had with DOE about really strengthening or kind of even redoing the transition program. Because right now, to me, it's like a babysitting service. I know in Clayton County it is. It is. Where the students are going on field trips to the zoo or some other place, and I'm trying to figure out when are they going to, they can do that on their own leisure time. Why is it not more structured and really kind of working with those IEPs to really expand on that as far as what are their career goals? Because like you said earlier in your presentation, a lot of students do have goals of their own, but they're not really strengthened through the school support system to be able to let them know that those goals are attainable. Even though they might be disabled in this area, doesn't mean that they can't do anything else with the right support. So that's why I really want to know what kind of conversations have been had with the transition programs, and then even for the ones that are not in a transition program but are still have the IEPs in high school.
That's a great question. The biggest thing I could say is that and I think you know this already, it varies tremendously by the school district. I mean, some counties, we have a program called Project Search. I shouldn't say we. The Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities supports that, and that is an internship program where the schools partner with Vocational Rehabilitation and with a local business. So in the areas that have something like Project Search, we tend to have really strong transition outcomes. But it's so varied by the local districts. I actually heard a story the other day that really concerns me, a district that I won't name in this setting, but that is where schools are allegedly really encouraged to basically push kids with disabilities out of high school by the time they're 18. Now, as y'all know, they're entitled to those supports until they're 22, and in the system we want to set up, there would be that strong transition process to get them into work. We have individual relationships with some of the transition coordinators, but frankly, I suspect that the ones we've got are with the folks who are more on the ball. I don't personally know the Clayton County folks. I had not heard the bit about going to the zoo. That's very interesting and very disappointing. Overall, and I think our conversations with DOE, they know what we're up to, but frankly, we probably need to talk more. And again, I think that's where getting an employment first system will help, because we've almost got to make everybody come to the same table and say, hey, this is what we're working on. There's so many other competing priorities out there. But yeah, it's a varied landscape, and I hate that, because so much of it for our kids with disabilities right now is luck. It's who you know, and it's how good your school is. It shouldn't be that way. Did you want to add anything?
Right. I just wanted to echo what Darcy had said, which is that that's part of what we are illustrating with the point of coming together with the various state agencies, because frankly we do need to strengthen some of the policies and procedures that across the state, so that it's not just hit or miss depending on, you know, as Darcy alluded to, what school that you're in, what school system you're in. This is why this really does have to be an effort where we all come together, because really, you know, we're talking about employment and inclusive post-secondary education, but you are so right to say that, but we got to start earlier on than that. We've got to start with parents, with kids when they're young, and helping them, show them what the possibilities are, and for that matter, people with disabilities themselves to show. I mean, I have so many people come up to me, and people with disabilities who say, what do you mean, you work? You know, and we really have to change this. So it's an education, it is a true culture change, not just across state agencies, but with our citizens, with our people with disabilities and families, to show them what is possible, so that not only do we have these processes and structures in place in the state, but we have people with disabilities saying, no, I want to work. I can work. I know I can work. And the families to understand and not have that fear for their loved one.
Can you emphasize that age again, one more time, that the services are supposed to go to, instead of 18?
22.
22.
22.
Let's just make sure we all hear that. 22. Any other comments or questions? Well, I know as we continue this conversation, y'all will probably contribute more to it, and I count on that. I count on you making sure that we are being watchful and opening every door that we possibly can. There are other places in our state where agencies have learned the value of working together. It's not impossible at all. I don't think this is impossible either, but we're certainly opening up some really good ideas, and I appreciate that. I really do. So I thank y'all. I thank you for the courage that you live every day and the example that you are, and I really think that this is going to help a lot. So thank you so much for being pushy and telling us we needed to work on this. I really, really am grateful for you. So thank y'all.
Thank you.
We'll give you a few minutes to gather. So the artist isn't in the room at all.
No, she's not. She's the young woman down in Milledgeville.
Beautiful. Please tell her we said thank you. I wonder if there's a way to get a picture of that at all, or even any copies of y'all's comments for us to have as we work on this later. If you want to work on that for us, that would be good, because those are great. Those are great visuals. Thank you. So with the conversation of employment, it was brought out without a doubt that education is a very important component to that, and it begins early. We will hear later, I think, on some early education, but today Dr. Daniel Crimmins, the director for the Center for Leadership and Disability for Georgia State University, is here and will be presenting next. I know that in his position he oversees a range of academic, training, technical assistance, research, and model service programs that contribute to the independence, inclusion, and productivity of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities of all ages. Dr. Crimmins, I hope you'll tell us a little bit more about yourself, too, when you step up to that microphone. Thank you so much.
But I do need these. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and members of the study committee. It is a privilege and honor to be here today. And you just cited my title, but let me say that I here really am representing a consortium of Georgians, parents and students, professionals, programs serving students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, advocates who really want to create new opportunities for young people in our state. Specifically to this, my center has served as a conduit for funding to the studies that Mr. Sarton referred to the startups of new programs in several states, and in gathering folks together so that we speak with one voice around the importance of this issue in our state. And I'll refer to some of my colleagues specifically as we move forward. So it is an honor to be here. In part, I get to say that I have been doing this kind of work for about 40 years. It's a long time. And I think this movement toward inclusive post-secondary education is among the most exciting developments that I've witnessed. It really is a new day and a new era for these students. So what exactly is inclusive post-secondary education other than a big mouthful? And so I do apologize at some points. I will say IPSE to streamline the process just a little bit. It becomes a bit of a tongue twister. But it really refers to a mechanism by which students who have historically been excluded from colleges and universities because of admissions criteria, not having essentially the intellectual capability, are given access to that university campus and that college and that environment. College is a place, we typically think of college as a place where students are there to learn, to think great thoughts, to study diligently, to master a body of knowledge in a major subject area, and then go on to a career. And my line here now is, and now let's get real. As a parent of 3 young adults who all graduated from college, this is truly an idealized version of what college is supposed to be about. I tease my oldest still that her real major was social studies with an emphasis on social. College is a time of exploration, and many of the most important lessons are learned outside of the classroom. The ability to make friends, work with others, to reflect on common goals, to deepen our personal interests, to identify and interact with mentors, to try out jobs that teach you exactly what you don't want to do the rest of your life, to be resilient, and to know that everything's not going to go your way all of the time. My point here is to reflect on the lessons actually learned in college. It's important to consider that only a small part of the college experience is in the classroom and in the course of study that leads to a degree. Much of it has to do with making the transition to becoming a more independent adult, discovering new interests and talents, and discovering who you want to be and who you want to be with. So college is a formative experience for many of us. And inclusive post-secondary education is a way for students with intellectual disabilities to go to college. As you know, since 1975, students with intellectual disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate public education until they reach the age of 22. This was referred to in the previous speakers. This right doesn't extend to colleges, though, because they're governed by the Higher Education Opportunity Act, not the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And you being legislators appreciate the distinctions of governing statutes. What this has meant on the most practical level is that students with intellectual disabilities may attend school with a group of peers, free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, until their high school graduation. And then many see their friends go off to college, yet they may be remaining in their high schools, often wishing that they too could move on. About 20 years ago, in several places across the country, parents and teachers listened to this wish and said, why not? Can the university be a place of growth and learning for students with intellectual disabilities? And the answer to that is yes. And it is. And if that answer is yes, and it is, does it have a negative impact on the other students or the broader university? And the answer to that is no. Inclusive post-secondary education programs have grown in number and reach across the country, from perhaps 50 programs in 2000 to 150 in 2009 to almost 250 now in 48 of 50 states. The reauthorization in 2008 of the Higher Education Opportunity Act included a number of provisions that paved the way for increasing opportunity and access to post-secondary education for students with intellectual disabilities. And in many ways, this has created a new expectation that this is possible. Inclusive post-secondary education in Georgia began with 3 students enrolled in a new program at Kennesaw State University in 2009. We have members of representatives and faculty from that program here today. The KSU program developed a formal 2-year certificate program and has grown over the last 6 years to now serve more than 30 students, including students enrolled for an additional 2-year certificate. In addition to the dedication of the program's leadership and their staff, their success is due in part to support from the Georgia legislature. The KSU program remained the only program in the state until January 2015. A number of other colleges and universities became interested in developing programs around that, in 2010, 2009, and began to lay the groundwork for those programs between 2011 and 2013. But a huge boost for inclusive post-secondary education in Georgia came with legislative funding that was included in the 2013 budget and has continued in each of the last several budget cycles and has helped the startup of programs. And we now proudly have 4 post-secondary programs in operation in Georgia at Columbus State University, at East Georgia State College, at Georgia Tech, in addition to the program at KSU. The financial support of the Georgia legislature has been critical. And colleagues in other states now ask us in Georgia what they should do with their legislators so that their legislators will value IPSC as much as the Georgia House and Senate do. So on behalf of our students in Georgia, now and in the future, and the programs, I thank you. We thank you. This year, almost 50 students will attend inclusive post-secondary education programs in Georgia. It's quite an increase from 3 in just 6 years ago. But it's a long way from what we estimate to be 2,000 students exiting the schools each year who've been from special education. What's important to emphasize about the inclusive programs is not just that they're there to make students feel good about being on a college campus. The students all include academic coursework. Students register for classes, either for credit or auditing. They complete assignments. They receive mentoring from peers and program staff, and they get grades. They also have internships with on-campus offices and programs, explore the areas of interest inside and outside the classroom, like theater or sports. And they make friends. They build a social network on the campus. Because of the language in the Higher Education Opportunity Act, programs all emphasize employment as the desired outcome for these programs. So they support students in getting jobs, often 2 or 3 different jobs over the course of the college experience, looking for that first career. Are programs successful in improving employment outcomes? The national data say yes. inclusive post-secondary education is associated with higher rates of employment and higher levels of pay. What about in Georgia? As cited earlier, the preliminary data suggest yes. The students from Kennesaw State's universities graduates are now 57% are employed and 21% are pursuing further education. And isn't this what we would want for any of our students who go to college, to either leave college as employed or pursuing further education? The good news is we're getting new programs up and running, capacity is growing, and we have great outcomes. So where do we go next? Well, as I noted before, we've got more than 2,000 students potentially coming out every year for whom this should be a consideration. Our challenge is to find the resources to address this demand. We've learned that in the last few years that inclusive post-secondary education programs require both startup funding and sustainability funding. I learned this lesson the hard way. We attempted a pilot program at Georgia State University without any external funding, assisting students in negotiating the admissions and registration processes, payment for courses, and being part of university life. We thought we might be able to do this with volunteers, lots of goodwill, and the students who really didn't feel they wanted a formal program. We tried, and we learned that students do need assistance in negotiating the world of the university, all students, and that a program assists students, not just the students, but also the university faculty and staff to understand the needs of the students and to answer questions and resolve issues. Formal structures and supports are needed, and they require dedicated staff and resources, which in turn require ongoing financial investment. So what do we need to do to grow our capacity and ensure students who want to attend inclusive post-secondary programs can in fact do so? Well, first and foremost, ongoing program operations require funding. The programs across Georgia are getting closer in doing this with your support, the state funding, through the charge of tuition, fees, and some very innovative partnerships between the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency and the Georgia Department of Education. So we've heard a number of things about silos, and certainly at the highest level, folks are working to break down those silos or to reach across silos to make things happen. And this is an example of some very nice things happening for students with intellectual disabilities in their programs at the university level. That these will contribute to the staffing of our programs. But we have another 4 universities that have done the preliminary work, that are ready to develop programs on their campuses. But it takes 1 to 2 years of lead time to get a program off the ground, and that's what we've learned in the last several years. And this is a time that they require startup support. The second and very important consideration is the need for financial support for individual students to attend inclusive post-secondary programs, which have a far smaller pool of financial options available relative to traditional colleges and universities. And what this has meant is that many students students who don't have the resources or their families cannot access programs. So we want to make sure that inclusive post-secondary programs are accessible to all, from all backgrounds. I'm happy to tell you that one piece of the solution has just occurred this summer. The Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency changed its policy so that qualifying students who are eligible for VR services can attend inclusive post-secondary education programs as part of their VR work plans. This is huge. This means that the agency will pay for their tuition, fees, books, and a living stipend for those qualifying students from low-income families. We continue to be concerned, however, about students from middle-income families who often rely on scholarship dollars to make traditional programs a reality. Students in IPSC programs don't typically qualify for traditional scholarship programs, and increasing scholarship availability is going to be a key to make sure that programs are accessible to all qualified, motivated students, and that they can be given a fair chance at experiencing inclusive post-secondary education. So that's a little bit about where we've been, a little bit about where we are, and a little bit more about where we hope to go. I really do want to acknowledge here the contributions of colleagues and partners across Georgia at Kennesaw State University, Columbus State University, East Georgia State College, and Georgia Tech for all of their work in getting programs up and going. My colleagues at Georgia State University for their efforts in really fostering this idea across the state. Our colleagues at the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities and the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, who have been a funding stream for this, have made them possible for startup and operations. To the GVRA and the Department of Education for their commitment to the sustainability of these programs, and once more to the Georgia Legislature for your interest, commitment, and support of inclusive post-secondary education. We will need your continued and even increased support to realize the successes that other states have achieved in with these programs. It really is a life-changing experience for these students. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I told Dr. El-Sawi from Kennesaw State University that he has a packet of materials that he's also happy to share with you about the Kennesaw program. Thank you very much to the members of the study committee.
Thank you, Dr. Crimmins. That's great and exciting, too. Representative Stovall.
I'm really excited to hear that students do have an opportunity to attend college. I do have a couple of questions.
I hope I can answer them.
Okay. How are the students selected, and what are the criteria that's used?
I'm going to say because there are 4 programs, there are probably 4 sets of criteria. But in general, there's an application process that that virtually all the schools will have an application and interview. They'll look for some basic literacy skills. I think Kennesaw uses a 3rd grade level. It's probably in there. But they'll look for engagement. They look for motivation. They look for commitment to wanting to finish. They look for an interest, and essentially I'm going to say it's a pretty similar process to what schools use for their regular admissions process. Who's a student who will come to this campus and benefit from who we are and what we offer? Many of the schools have, some of the schools are developing a residential component. Many of the students are still living at home, and one of the things over the next several years as these programs develop, we see that we'd like students to have the same range of options that their brothers and sisters have. That's the example I usually use. So we had a forum at University of Georgia last spring, and one of the students who came, who was actually attending a college in North Florida, was highly disappointed, as were his 2 or 3 siblings and his father and mother, who were all diehard University of Georgia fans, and he said he wished that he could go there. So that's in some ways it is so I'm talking about sort of then 2 things. One is that how do we create opportunities for any student who wants to go, mm-hmm. and then how do we find that match that is the right match for that student? And I'm going to say there's some elements that it's a very similar process to anyone applying to university.
Okay. And then with the 2-year certificate, what type of certificate are they awarded? And is it like based in a particular area that they're studying, or how does that work?
By and large, because the University System of Georgia, all of our first wave of programs are in state universities. Mm-hmm. The University System of Georgia has a certificate program that is sort of widely used, and so it's a credential of achievement. It's a credential of a course of study. The particular course of study is developed and designed using a person-centered plan, mm-hmm. and a planning process that really considers who is the student, what are their talents, and what are their career goals, and how do we make the university and the college experience something that will help you accomplish that. And then the certificate documents the participation in the academic coursework, in the internships, and in the supervised and paid employment.
And how is the recruitment done to recruit those students, the 50 that are in there now?
Very carefully. No, I have to look over to colleagues from Kennesaw who have the longest standing program. But my understanding is you've had 100 applicants per year and had to cut off applications in order to accept whatever 12 or 15 or 20 students per year. A lot of it is done through word of mouth, although we've conducted community forums that have involved more than 600 people across the state to say this is a possibility. So one of the tensions with this is that, you know, in some ways you have to create a demand, but you don't want to create frustration. And so one of the reasons, frankly, we're here in front of you today is we feel that we've begun to create the demand. We need help really soon to make sure that we have capacity all across the state to meet that demand.
Okay. And yeah, and I guess you kind of might have answered it earlier, because I was just wondering with the Pell Grant and the general financial aid, you know, I guess I was trying to figure out why they wouldn't have qualified, because it's not like a standard program up under the university.
When the programs are up and operational, they can apply to become a certified transition program, comprehensive transition program. CTP is unfortunate. The letters are in my head, but not always the words. When they become a CTP, then students are eligible to apply for Pell Grants and are eligible for federal student aid. And because that is a designation in the Higher Education Opportunity Act. In this part of the lag time, though, of getting programs up and going is that it takes a little bit of time to get a program to be certified as that CTP. Okay. But no, you're exactly right that is a possibility. One of a total game changer for Georgia has been, and my nod is to our colleagues at the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, that change in policy frankly will open the door to students whose families or themselves are of limited means, and so that is a huge policy change that we think will have that frankly is going to also help to contribute to the need for more programs.
Right. And has this been considered even with the technical colleges as well?
One of the schools that is, I'll say, kind of queued up and ready to go is at one of the technical colleges. Albany Tech has been very interested. They've been exploring this for 2 years now and are very, very interested and committed to starting a program. Should that be successful, we actually, regardless of whether, first we expect that it will be successful once it gets going, but at such time, then we would say this is a method by which we would look to open those doors to other students on other campuses.
And last question, has there been any thought about maybe even suggesting, even with the Hope Scholarship, or some kind of way of being able to add some kind of component in to be able to even help with the money for the students to be able to attend, since they are going to a post-secondary institute?
I would, because of the way you asked the question, I would have to say, of course there's been some thought of that. And then I can also say that the state of Tennessee and the state of Kentucky, they both have mechanisms that are similar to our Hope scholarships. One has created a parallel mechanism, and one has created access to what is the equivalent to our Hope Scholarship. So that other states, the precedent has been set in other states. Many of us think that would be very important, particularly for those middle-income students where, none of us can save enough to send our children to college. So those are really important means to open the doors for students.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Such great questions. You are so important to this committee.
I think
really,
she's living the life.
It's great. Yeah, you just hope you get someone appointed like this. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any other questions among us? I had one when you talked about your startup support. Yes, I think what kind of, how much for those startups? How much do you need?
I'm going to say the round numbers that I don't mind saying them out loud. Universities, first let me just preface, universities love to entertain good ideas. And I'm going to say they all would acknowledge that this is a good idea. Mm-hmm. And then they say, and how are we going to pay for it in the short run and in the long run? And we did feasibility studies of about $10,000, and I'm going to say it was not quite enough to make a difference in the world of the university. So I think that that's too small a number. So I think that the first year of getting people organized and studying costs at least that, $10,000 to $25,000. I think the year that you say we're really going to do this, you need at least $50,000 to begin to put the structures in place on a university campus with how do you work out registration? How do you work out well, there's the registrar's office, there's the the advising office, sort of how do you the residential office, so there's all of these structures in the university that frankly, for kids that go through the regular admissions process and orientation, those of you as parents that have ever done this, remember you had to talk to 8 different people in 8 different offices. Well, all of those offices still need to know that these students are going to be on campus, and how are we going to take care of them. In the first year of operations, then, you have no tuition money, you have no CTP designation, says that's when you actually need a chunk of money to run the program. And if I were, I could say, if a push come to shove, I'd say it probably costs $100,000 at that point to support that program in that first year. But then after that, you should be able to begin to reduce those supports, because you should begin to get this flow of the sort of essentially the revenue that is in the tuition, the fees that might be charged for a program. So that would be the rough trajectory.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you. That's great. Anything else? Well, thank you. And thank you for this work. It is great, and for your partners that are here as well. We look forward to hearing, even more and more as we go through this, to visit some of you and to make sure that we actually see that success
And
firsthand.
I'm a spokesperson for my partners. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next, I believe we have Jennifer Briggs. Jennifer is the CEO of Briggs & Associates Incorporated from Roswell, which has assisted over 3,000 individuals in finding and maintaining productive, rewarding work, as well as helping them enhance their lives through community participation. Jennifer, thank you so much for the work that you are doing, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for allowing me to be here today and to talk about the work. Like you said, I run a company, Briggs & Associates. It's about 27 years old, and it is a private Georgia-based company. And I set it up that way as an employment agency for people with disabilities because I wanted to do business as a business with business so that we could come out of that range of charity so people could be valued and paid for the contributions and what they had to offer. I started out representing 5 people in 1988, and since then we have grown to serve over 3,000. Currently, we're representing 800 Georgians who have disabilities. The footprint for Briggs & Associates goes from Columbus to Rome, from Carrollton over to Augusta. We serve anybody who needs non-traditional support in the workplace, people with intellectual disabilities, people who have mental illness. And the company has a no-refusal policy. And to me, that's what's so exciting about the Employment First Georgia initiative, is that it changes the question. The question is never, can this person work, but what is it going to take? What are the conditions for success for this person? What interests do they have? And what contributions can they make that are valued in the business world at the going rate? Everybody who we have represented and worked with has always been employed by the business at least minimum wage or greater. And the good news is that we know how to do this in Georgia. We know how to do this. We know when somebody has gone through the education system, they've been assessed, they have gone through all of the programs that we have, they are ready to be contributing members in their community at the going rate and truly valued. And that honestly is what's going to make our communities whole, is when we value everybody at the going rate. Through supported and customized employment, it's a very individual process. We get to know the person and through a discovery process. And again, what the questions we're asking are, what are the conditions for the success? What interests does the person have? And what contributions are going to be valued in the workplace? And from that, what we create is a profile for that person. And I wish I would have done slides. I brought all the pictures because they speak 1,000 words, but I didn't. So we create what is a profile for that person. Frequently, we have pictures on it because when I say autism or when I say somebody with a disability, the vision you have is very different than who they really are. And so by having a visual profile, the employer can see exactly who we're talking about when we're talking about the person and when we're representing them. So when we know their interests, that's where the job search begins. And sometimes they come along, sometimes we work in their behalf, and we do the job search. At that point, what we do is when we've found where they can work, we learn the job, and we begin to assist in the training. After the person has learned the job, then we're there to help them maintain and stay relevant in the workplace. And what we know is that even when somebody has worked 2 years, 3 years in the same place, managers can change, technology can change. And so what our role becomes at that point is to help people remain relevant in the workforce. And that, in a nutshell, is the process that we use. But what I'd like to do is give you some stories, because I think maybe that might help in knowing some of the people who we work with. There is a wonderful, wonderful man. His name is Maurice. Maurice came to us after he was didn't work out so well in the day program, and he had been fired from 2 traditional jobs, food service type of positions. Maurice has a visual impairment. You can tell that his glasses are relatively thick. He is deaf, and he uses some sign language. He has mild cerebral palsy, and so his navigation is sometimes a little awkward. So the food service really wasn't the best fit for him. I just think that didn't work out so well. And we got to know Maurice, and what we knew is that when we saw him, he had an incredible attention to detail, and he could stick with the task for a very long time. He liked to see exactly what was going on. And so we knew that's what we were looking for. He did best indoors. We knew all of those things about him. And so there was a possibility for a job at Emory University Midtown Hospital. And the position is stocking the carts for the operating rooms. And every time there's an operation, the doctor needs that cart to contain the items that he or she needs for that operation. You need to be incredibly detailed for this work. We knew Maurice was. And we knew that we could teach him to look at the differences between the instruments that were needed for that. And so we went in and we learned those carts. We saw what where you were going to get all the details around the job. And I'm here to tell you that Maurice works that job. He started off doing the carts for 2 operating rooms. The doctors were so pleased with what was happening, then they would say, who stocked those? And they would come out and see that it was Maurice, and they wanted him to stock their carts for their operations so that they knew that everything they needed was going to be there for them. Maurice has been there about 7 years, and right now he stocks carts for 14 different operating rooms every day. one of the things that happens when people go to work is that people in the community actually learn who they are. And one of the very cool things is the doctors began to come out and ask our staff, how can we communicate with him? How can we tell him that he's doing a great job? How can we? And so part of our job became helping him communicate with the doctors and making those friendships that actually are on site. There was I want to tell you another story about Mark. Mark is an individual who has autism, and he is very, very active in his community. One of the things that he is so active in his community that it became a hindrance to the community. He wanted to make public comments in all of the places in the courthouse and where he was, and he wanted to know everybody in the community, and he got to know the police rather well. And that's when we were called in to say, can you find him employment? Can you find something for him? And what we know is that Mark does have the right to speak publicly at meetings, but what we did is gave him the structure to do that. You learn what they're going to talk about, and then let's go over what you're going to say, and then you can sign up and you can make public comment, which wasn't near as exciting for him for what he was doing, and so that was very short-lived. And what we know, too, is that he loved electronics. He loved to take things apart, put them together. And so right now, by day, Mark works at Walmart full-time, puts all the bicycles together for everybody. At night, he's DJ Boogie, and he DJs all kinds of different events in the community. And what our staff does is help him run the business and help him decide what music is appropriate for that event. And he has quite a full life, and like many people in the community, his day job is really where a lot of the money is, because he doesn't get to DJ all the time. That's sort of the fun gigs he has. So he has a very, very rich life. One of the other stories I wanted to tell you was Christina's story, and actually I invited Christina to come with me today, but she got called into work. So she couldn't make it. Christina is a young lady who graduated 3 years ago from a high school in North Fulton. She has Down syndrome. She has an incredible passion for sports. She loves it. She can tell you football stats better than anybody I know. I mean, she knows it inside and out. And she's very, very charismatic. And so for her first job, we helped her get a job at the Georgia Aquarium, where she did a great job. She helped guide some of the guests around, and she did wonderfully. But what we learned then as we were working there is that the Georgia College Football Hall of Fame was opening up down the street. And before they even opened their doors, Christina had a job there. And if you go there today, she can help you with any of the sites inside of there. She can work any of the technology. She often does the shows that are there, and it's really just a wonderful place for her. And when we talk about employment, customized employment, supported employment, all of that process, one of the things that we focus on a lot is the growth of the individual who's participating, and all of the things that have so changed in their lives, how they begin to get friends. They begin to become consumers in their own community. I mean, there's a reason to wake up in the morning, you want to, you get cleaned up, you go to work, there's purpose. But so much of the time, we don't look at the other side, and what does it bring to business? And so we actually talked to Emory the the Emory Hospital system about that. We have people, about 40 people throughout that system who work at Emory University. And so what we did, Emory Hospitals, what we did is we're actually doing a return on investment study with Emory University. And the study is actually showing the rate of return, how much cost savings they have gained from putting the right person in the right job. And an example of that is John, who collects and sanitizes the IV pumps and poles, you know, that are in all of the rooms. They have batteries and they need to be cleaned, and the nurses were doing that. They were trying to run down and get those poles and put them in. And what Emory found is that they were spending up to $10,000 per month in rental expense for those pumps and poles, because nobody took the time to take them out of the room, clean them, check them. We said, we can do that job. We've got this. We can do that job. And today they have no rental expense, no expense at all. And the annual cost savings for the salaries that they've incurred is over $14,000. That's real. That is not, that's putting the right person in the right job. And how I have always looked at this is we know of a workforce that just hasn't even begun to be tapped. And there are so many needs in businesses that can be, you know, that we can fill. And it truly does impact business too. There is a position in Children's Hospital in the pharmacy, and you know the children can only take such a teeny tiny bit of acetaminophen, you know, and so what Children's was doing was actually ordering all of the syringes to be filled to whatever, it's a millimeter or whatever it is, I'm not exactly sure. And we said, we can do this. There's a gentleman who has autism who can get it exact every single time and happens to love the color of orange. And so he can do this all day long. He started out providing the syringes filled for Children's Hospital, and now he provides it for Eggleston and Children's. One of the other positions, and I have 3,000 examples that I can give you. One of the other examples that I have is it's called a blood kit position, and the nurses need to be able to use that sterilized packet to draw blood at the time, so that the infection rate is very low. And what they had noticed is that the infection rate was actually going up. And at that point, one of my staff actually studied the process that was going on at Emory Hospital. And what she found is that they were ordering the kits externally, and then when they would run out, the nurses or the aides would be trying to put the stuff together so that they could get it done in an appropriate manner. And again, what my staff did is wrote up a proposal and said, we've got this. We can help you with this. And so what we do now is internally put those blood kits together, and what they have watched are those rates go down tremendously. So it's true savings to business. It's not a one-way. It is not just a feel-good, which is great, but it's not just a feel-good. It's a workforce that matters, and it's a workforce that needs to be tapped, and business knows that. Toys R Us distribution, their turnover rate, since they have employed some of the people who we represent, and that's in McDonough, Georgia. Their turnover rate has decreased by 5%. And when it costs $2,000 to hire somebody, that's a significant savings to business. You can tell I get really excited about this stuff. And so the return on investment from business is just huge. And I think when we have Employment First Georgia in place, and when the question changes, not can somebody work, but what are the conditions they need for success, that all of a sudden we're going to see people going to work, because it's not even going to be on the table that there's other options. So that's really all I have. Do y'all have any questions?
I bet we do. That was inspirational. Let's see. Ready?
I don't mean to hog all the questions. I'm just excited.
I am too.
Do you all? One of the questions I do have with the clients that you represent, do you also help them with financial management? Because the reason I ask that question, because I know a lot of times, especially if they are mostly intellectual and maybe even some other developmental disabilities, that sometimes they're easily to be taken advantage of. When it comes to, in the employment world, and even when it comes down to them going to cash the checks and making sure that they are keeping up, with their money. So is that one of the services that you all provide to your clients as well?
Yes. One of the things that we take very seriously is that we're playing in people's pocketbooks, and we do know that. There's the navigators in Georgia who actually help with the Social Security. How much can they earn and when is it going to positively impact? And so some people can work 20 hours, some people can actually work full time, still maintain the medical part of the benefits. As far as the work negotiations, we are absolutely part of that. We help people decide and figure out how is the check going to go into the bank, is it direct deposit, what happens with it, and we do help with that piece of it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Well, I thank you. The sky's the limit, obviously, and I applaud your heart, first of all, but your passion to figure out the places where people can fit and do better jobs than anyone else. So persevere.
Thank you very much.
Stay in touch with us, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our final speaker today is Ellen Jaeger. And Ellen, thank you. Ellen has been in both the study committees that I was privileged to chair today, so thank you for hanging with us and closing us out here. She's the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for Mental Health America of Georgia. And as many of you are aware, that mission is to enhance the mental health of all Georgians through education, outreach, and advocacy, and just the great work that you do. So thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you, and thanks again for the opportunity. I'm not usually asked to talk about employment because, in fact, quite often the conversation never includes mental health. So I'm really delighted to have this opportunity. I'm here to tell you that people with a diagnosis of mental health also want to work. We had a gathering of about 600 people last week, and they had to vote on top priorities, and housing, employment, and transportation inevitably rise to the top. So we have 600 people, all with a variety of mental health diagnoses, who do agree how important employment is. They face slightly different challenges than some of the conversation you've already heard. Unfortunately, the stigma gets in the way quite often for folks with a diagnosis of mental illness to be employed. People have a misconception, I believe, of what someone with a mental health diagnosis may or may not do. And people often see them as combative, violent people you can't trust. And so while looking for a job, they face the stigma that really has been with them since childhood. And it's a shame because we actually know that people with a mental illness are far more likely to be the victim of a crime than the perpetrator of a crime. Nevertheless, this stigma and discrimination does follow them. The challenges they have in school are also slightly different. It is not unusual for a child with a mental illness to be asked to leave school, and they are suggested that perhaps a GED is a better route for them. That also changes their opportunity as far as going to a four-year university. So their challenges are different. The outcome, of course, is not, what we want. And I say we because I have a diagnosis of a mental health. Clearly, I am working in the right environment since I work for Mental Health America. I do get support. But what we all want is opportunity to live the best life we can live. That means a life of recovery. I did not say cure, I said recovery. A life that you can feel good about. Maybe it's a date Saturday night, but it's opportunity that we're looking for. Without jobs, there is not a lot of reason to get up and motivate yourself in the morning. But along with those jobs, people with mental illness do have to have housing, and they do have to have transportation. The mental health population is also slightly different because adults, there is no waiver program that they can receive services through. So, we're not working perhaps with the same exact set of circumstances, but we are looking at the same outcome. Certainly, the whole mental health community supports employment first. We will do everything we can to promote that notion because it will build a much better Georgia. I do want to tell you that I was very disappointed last year when I read about a student who had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and when his diagnosis became known, he was thrown out of his dorm at Georgia State University and asked to leave the school. He, in fact, was not exhibiting any of the signs of his diagnosis. The diagnosis itself was enough to spur and move this type of action. He has gone on to sue Georgia State, but I never heard the results. But it is disheartening for anyone to jump to the conclusion that because of his diagnosis, he would not have been a wonderful student and a wonderful employee for someone. On a very high note, I would like to tell you about someone you all know who was very successful despite his diagnosis and in fact achieved perhaps the highest job one could ever achieve, and that would be Abraham Lincoln. He did have a diagnosis of a mental illness, and clearly it did not stop him from doing his job. So we are happy to be here, happy to participate in the conversation. Really delighted to be included in the Employment First movement. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Jaeger? Well, if not, have you got one? Do you have one, Bob? No. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow. We've had a good start, and that's what it is, good start. So we will have at least 3, maybe 4 more meetings to work through this and do all that we can. And as I said earlier, I want to remind you, if you have some ideas after this meeting that have come to you about specific things that need to be included, please let us know. I know this room is full of great resources, and so I'm counting on you to help us do that. We are looking to early October for our next meeting. So if you are not on the distribution list and would like to be, please let me know or Michael know. You can send us an email, and we'll make sure that you're at it. If there's someone else that you know that isn't here today that this has made you think of, I gotta say a little thank you though to Vocational Rehab. As I sit here, my heart is swelling. Thank y'all for the good work you are doing. I genuinely appreciate it, and I have seen it. So it is a good day. Might not be sunny outside, but the sun is shining on y'all. So thank you. Thank you very, very much. Y'all have a good, safe afternoon and continue to do the good work that you are each doing.